Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to begin by extending a very warm Happy New Year, a healthy one to each and every one of our viewing audience today, and certainly wish each and every one of you a much better 2021 than we just experienced in 2020. My name is Nick Larigakis. I am president of the American Hellenic Institute. And as always, we are coming to you live from our AHI headquarters in Washington, D.C., Hellenic House. I bid each one of you a warm welcome. Today's presentation is being sponsored by James H. Lego Company out of Springfield, Ohio. On behalf of AHI, our nonprofit independent Greek American Public Policy Center, it is my pleasure to present our first virtual speakers forum for 2021, the Biden administration and U.S. foreign policy concepts in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Eastern Mediterranean has never had as much geostrategic importance to the United States since arguably the early stages of the Cold War. As the Biden administration takes the reins, its approach to the Eastern Mediterranean and the players central to it, namely Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey, will be watched closely in foreign and defense policy circles, especially given President Biden's and those officials on his national security team known track record and familiarity with the region and the policies of our Greek American community. Greece prides itself as a vanguard of Europe, a linchpin of regional stability and security. However, Greece also is at the center of an arc of instability. Greece faces daily acts of aggression, provocation, and threats at the hands of a fellow NATO member, Turkey. In addition to all other malign influences Greece joins with its allies, such as the United States and NATO partners, to neutralize or combat in the Eastern Mediterranean and broader region. The United States correctly has recognized this during the previous administration and acted accordingly. A renewed mutual defense cooperation agreement, joint military exercises, bolster military construction funding at Suda Bay, and a boost in investment to Greece's international military education and training, the so-called IMET program, all demonstrate enhanced defense and security cooperation between the two longtime NATO allies. Similarly, the United States has engaged with strategic partner Cyprus. Earlier this month, the U.S. held a groundbreaking event for the Cyprus Center for Land, Open Seas, and Post-Security, otherwise known as Cyclops, a $5 million U.S.-funded regional training facility. When completed in November 2021, Cyclops will provide experts from the region with training on security and safety, including customs and exports control, port and maritime security, and combatant cybercrime. This major development came on the heels of a partial lifting of the arms prohibition on Cyprus, and for the first time, an investment in Cyprus's international military educational training. Bottom line, will the Biden administration view the Eastern Mediterranean through the same prism as the previous administration, and if so, build further upon its engagement in the region, and in particular, Greece and Cyprus? We've assembled an expert panel of extensive knowledge of the region to share their perspectives. Ambassador Tom Miller, Dr. Michael Rubin, and Piero Tozzi. I will introduce each one of them in a brief comment. Their bios have been included on the invitation that you will have received, so I will not go into their full bios. After each presenter today has made their opening statement, we will then engage in a discussion, a Q&A, and I will certainly welcome and encourage all of those who are viewing and listening to submit your questions on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. So to get us started, and without further ado, I would like to call our first presenter today, an old friend, a good friend, Ambassador Tom Miller. Ambassador Miller is presently the chair of the board of the U.S. subsidiary of Intralot, a corporation headquartered in Greece that runs lotteries in 11 U.S. states and the District of Columbia. A 29-year career diplomat, Tom's experience in the Foreign Service spanned many continents. From 2001 to 2004, he also served as the U.S. ambassador to Greece and was also the special coordinator for the Cyprus negotiations from 97 to 99. He also had served as DCM in Athens as well. Somebody who's very keenly aware of the region, its intricacies. It's a pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Ambassador, and we give you the Zoom platform for your perspectives.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you very much to AHI for putting this very important seminar on. I would like to very quickly touch on a number of issues that I think are of importance in the Eastern Med. We don't have enough time to get into any of them in depth. But first, a disclaimer. I did work in the Biden campaign. I'm not part of the Biden administration. So what I'm going to be saying is very much my own views and doesn't represent the new administration. Also, it's really hard to talk about the Eastern Med in a vacuum. There's so many issues that touch on that area that are of regional import. But I'm going to try to be a little bit artificial about it and touch on some areas that really are directly in the Eastern Med. I'm not going to be touching on some of the EU issues. I won't be touching on Libya, Syria, what have you, other than a brief reference to them. So I see in my mind 6 key issues, and others can quarrel with this or come up with other issues as well. And in rough immediacy, the things that keep me up at night, the first one is overflights and just the potential for military conflict in the Eastern Med between Greece and Turkey. The second is energy, which is relatively new. And Nick said, I gave a little bit of my background. I actually was first posted to Greece in the 80s. So I go back 35 years and a little bit of I'll be borrowing a little bit of that perspective in my comments. The third is one that's not on the scene right now, but has a potential to rear its head at any moment. That's refugees, and we all know the refugee crisis in 2013, 2015, and then earlier in January of this year, or last year, I should say. The fourth is Cyprus. Again, I'll touch on that a little bit. The fifth is Turkish regional aspirations, and that's a real big one. But I'm trying to limit this to the Eastern Med. In Syria, in Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh, you can go on and on. And the sixth one is a more amorphous one, and that is the EU dimension, the NATO dimension. And so let me run through each of these fairly quickly. First, a little bit of a backdrop. In Greece right now, you've got a government that is relatively new, rational, off to a pretty good start despite the COVID epidemic, and wrestling with tremendous pressures from COVID, given its economy is so much tourism based. And as I look back on my 35 years, enjoying a great deal of support, not only from the United States, but from its EU and NATO allies. On the other hand, you've got a Turkey that is autocratic, repressive, likes to throw its weight around, has really lost a number of allies in recent years, whether it's us over the S-400s and other issues, human rights, an autocratic regime, essentially, whether it's in our case, again, the loss of a buddy in the White House and President Trump, because I don't think that's going to be the same with President Biden, and some real internal issues. So let me touch on these 6 issues that I mentioned. And before, I didn't mention the patriarchate. And if I hadn't mentioned the patriarchate, I'd hear from my buddy Nick Larigakis forever. So this is an extremely important issue to Greeks around the world. I'm going to just put that aside for the time being. I think most of you on the phone call know how important this is, and it's one that just has got to be resolved in a satisfactory way, and it's going backwards. So first, overflights and the potential for conflict, and that's naval conflict as well. This is at the top of my list. We've seen an aggressive Turkey in the Eastern Med, in the Aegean, and as aggressive as I've ever seen them. And I go back a long way. I was the DCM in the embassy when EMEA Kardak happened, and that's about as close as the two sides have ever come to open conflict. And I don't think they're that far from that now. I don't think it would be the result of a specific decision in capitals. I think it would be more, if there was a conflict, it would be more an accident that went too far. But it worries me a lot. And it could spiral out very, very quickly and cause a dilemma not only for the two countries, but for NATO as well. The second is energy. In the relative scheme of things, relatively new. We all know that Turkey is impeding exploitation in large areas of the Eastern Med. This potentially has win-win outcomes if the sides can get there, and it's more than two sides. Some people have argued that this should be tied to a Cyprus solution. I would argue no. Cyprus is difficult enough on its own, and throwing energy into the mix, I think, would be a bridge too far. That's my personal opinion. And I did 2 years of Cyprus negotiations. There's no doubt, however, that if there was a solution on either the energy front or on Cyprus, it would benefit the other. The third is refugees. And I bring this up because right now it's not on anyone's scope. But Turkey has an ability, I forget what the exact number is, I think it's about 3.6 million refugees, largely Syrians, are in Turkey. And they have an ability, as they showed a year ago, just to turn on the faucet anytime they want and just allow refugees to go to Greece. And we saw that, we've seen that several times, and the Turks have not at all been subtle about this. And this poses a tremendous dilemma for Greece. On one hand, they can turn them back and risk their own image of being a defender of human rights, et cetera, to say nothing of world condemnation. On the other hand, the rest of Europe isn't too willing to take any of these refugees, so they can just let them pile up in Greece, as has happened. And it poses a real dilemma for Greece. Add to that the COVID crisis and recent reports that there was COVID in camps, and it's a nightmare. So this is one that I would just suggest watch out for. The fourth one is Cyprus, and you say, well, why Cyprus? It's been pretty quiet. There hasn't been much talk of a Cyprus negotiation in recent years. I spent, as I said, in the late 90s, 2 years as the American Cyprus negotiator. We came close, but I think that this is one that kind of this issue cast a pale throughout the region. And I'm not saying that there's any prospects right now. And in fact, if I was advising the Biden administration, I wouldn't suggest that they make a big effort on this at the current time. The solution on Cyprus, I can tell you with virtual certainty, will be something similar to the Annan Plan in 2004, or something similar to what Dick Holbrooke and I were doing 5 years before that, a bizonal, bicommunal federal solution. And I emphasize federal. It will be not a confederation, it will be a federation. But I don't see anything happening on Cyprus for the foreseeable future, unless and until it used to be the Turkish military that was the big stumbling block. Now it's one. And I would just add that it wasn't always the Turkish side. Largely, the Turkish side was the stumbling block, but there was a referendum in 2004. The Turkish Cypriot side voted for it. The Greek Cypriot side voted against it. The fifth thing I want to just mention briefly is Turkey's regional aspirations. And I think this kind of casts a pale over all that we're talking about. Erdogan has a desire to be a major player in the areas that I mentioned before, as well as in the Eastern Med. And I don't see this changing. I don't see him necessarily becoming more cooperative. So I don't see much progress or much of a room for optimism on this. And then the sixth is EU membership, NATO. EU membership used to be number one many years ago when I was ambassador to Greece, where the Turks thought, and the Europeans thought this was a way to bring Turkey in the fold and make it, a more sympathetic to the concerns of the Europeans, what have you. That's off the table. That's so far in the deep freeze. NATO is not off the table because if you go back to the first thing I mentioned, the potential for conflict between two NATO allies, that's very real. Nick, let me stop there. I've tried to hold to your 10-minute rule, just add that in my mind, I see tensions higher than they've been in a long time. I am concerned. I would advise a Biden administration to watch this region very, very closely, put good people in charge. I don't expect Joe Biden to be making a pronouncement on the Eastern Med every day, but put good people like my friend Jeff Pyatt and others in charge who know what they're doing. The S-400 issue, which I barely touched on, is going to be a major, major issue with this administration in Turkey, as it was before. And let me just leave it at that. A lot of problems, very few solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. As you mentioned, there are definitely a number of issues there. And just on your presentation, we can fill 2 or 3 hours worth of back and forth. But let's move on now to our next panelist, Dr. Michael Rubin. He is the resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he specializes in Iran, Turkey, and the broader Middle East. And he is a prolific writer on the region. And it is the first time that we invite him to one of our AHI forums. It's a great pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Rubin. So we give you the floor on this Zoom presentation.
Thank you so much. First of all, just a caveat, I'm not a real doctor. I'm just a doctor of history, which means I get paid to predict the past. And admittedly, I only get that right about 50% of the time. All my friends and critics, usually the same, would say that when it comes to a crystal ball, I have an even poorer record of prognostication. At any rate, I'm approaching this a little bit differently from Ambassador Miller because while he had such an in-depth history and experience with regard to Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean, I admit I've never been to Greece or Cyprus, although I've been to Turkey about 36 times over the past 25 years. That said, as I come from a perspective of someone who had traditionally focused on the Middle East, one of the things I've noticed, for example, is just how Greece and Cyprus together are really becoming the keystone in a coalescing axis, if you will, of moderation and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean that is prefaced against containing, if you will, the regional aggression, both ideological, economic, and military that's emanating from Turkey today. Now, while I'm not often an optimist when it comes to international affairs, when it comes to the Biden administration's posture on Greece, on Cyprus, and the Eastern Mediterranean, I will admit to being an optimist. The reason for that is the last 3 presidents, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, somehow proved that Erdogan was the Oval Office whisperer. I don't know how Erdogan did it, but whether it was advising, whether it was Obama, whether it was George W. Bush basically taking him repeatedly at his word and getting duped, what everyone thinks of the Iran-Iraq war, of the 2003 Iraq war in the lead up to that, if it was Obama talking to Erdogan about how to raise teenage daughters, or whether it was Trump just basically giving Erdogan a free pass on everything, we've seen that Erdogan believed that he could compensate for his lack of legal standing within the United States, his lack of influence over our judiciary and over our various economic processes and legal processes, by simply making a phone call to the Oval Office. That's not going to work in the Biden administration. They're too professional. Whatever one thinks of Biden's politics, the one thing that can't be disputed is that there is once again a process that drives the White House, that drives American policy making. We can dispute some of the politics, but the process is once again what differentiates what differentiates Biden from certainly Trump and perhaps some of the experiences beforehand. The one thing, and when it comes to bipartisanship, look, I'm a, if you will, an almost homeless Republican because I was a never Trumper. I'm a conservative because I believe in a small government. I don't fit in the Democratic Party. But one of the things I most lament as a foreign policy analyst is that when we transform our foreign policy into a political football game, then everyone loses. And we see certain topics which have become fodder for partisanship, whether it's the US relationship with Israel, the US relationship with Saudi Arabia. Happily, that's not the case when it comes to Greece, Cyprus, and the Eastern Mediterranean. I think what is going to really show the strength of the development of our relations in the next decade is the fact that there really is a good solid base of Democrats and Republicans who believe that this is an interest of the United States, this is the interest of Greece, this is the interest of Turkey, this is the interest of Cyprus and so forth, to have a, if you will, a strong relationship with Greece and Cyprus. And when I say it's with the interest of Turkey, look, traditionally my contacts with Turkey, my sources there are within the Tolga Ozal era. And while Erdogan has changed the demography and changed the perspective of Turkey, let's not forget that we ultimately need to win Turkey back. That's where I'm a little bit more pessimistic. There tends to be a view in Europe, and perhaps even among some in the State Department, that the problem is Erdogan, but we can just snap back to the status quo ante. Back of the napkin calculation is during the time of Erdogan's dominance of Turkish politics, more than 30 million Turkish school children have gone through the entirety of their school system. At the same time, if we want to look at the Turkish military and its traditional secularism, everyone up to basically a lieutenant colonel level owes their career to Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And then everyone above a brigadier general also owes their career to Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Perhaps you have a few colonels who aren't in prison, but there's a major problem. Incitement's a major problem, and this intellectual atrophy, you know the joke about how a political prisoner goes into a Turkish prison and the library goes into the prison library and asks for a book, and the librarian apologizes profusely and says, "I'm so sorry, we don't have these books, we only have the authors." The fact of the matter is, you've got a whole generation which you're not going to be able to so easily rehabilitate, nor will you be able to extract them from the Turkish administrative state. So we're talking about a decades-long project which we need to address. Part of this also goes into more directly incitement. I don't think we should be so dismissive of the talk of Lausanne revisionism. The problem isn't just Erdogan, it's a new generation that's become primed to reject the Lausanne Treaty and so forth, and that's going to breed, it's just fodder for a new generation of populists. The other thing we need to address, and this is where I differ a little bit with Ambassador Miller, I don't think the problem so much is the off-publicized threat that Turkey is going to release the refugees. I think what's motivating German fear especially isn't the fear of a wave of refugees. Rather, it's the fear that Erdogan has the ability to activate some of the ethnic Turkish citizens already in Turkey. Basically, they're looking in terms of basically terrorist cells. And that's something which privately German security will talk about, and it really does send chills down the spines of European leaders. Now, the fact that we've had assassinations in Paris of PKK activists, whatever one thinks about them, the fact that you've had similar attempts in Belgium, the fact that you recently had a Turkish agent turn himself in Vienna who was supposed to assassinate a former ethnic Kurdish politician in Austria should raise red flags, that Erdogan figures he's out of control. I mean, that Erdogan doesn't feel that there is accountability for his actions, and he's going to keep pushing until Europe and the United States and a coalition of democracies push back. I'll also differ a little bit with regard to Cyprus. I think it's important to press hard so that false conventional wisdom doesn't set in with regard to an immutable status quo. The more we accept that Turkey has grievances and we give those credence, after about 10 years, that becomes what's defined as normal in diplomacy, and Turkey will take that home to the bank. We need to oppose every Turkish demand so that it doesn't become assumed that this is just part of the new normal. And I would note, when it comes to Turkey and Turkish Cyprus, the Turkish Cypriots whom I know tend to be much more moderate than the AKP. They tend not to have the religiosity or the Muslim Brotherhood outlook of the AKP, and they worry that Erdogan is trying to change their traditional society. That's not just a problem for Cyprus and the ethnic Greeks in Cyprus, but that's a problem for all of Cyprus. And so we've got to start addressing the problem of the settlers in Cyprus, and we've got to start pushing back and differentiating between what Turkish interests are and Turkish Cypriot interests. That doesn't, I mean, we shouldn't be so deferential to allow Turkey to speak on behalf of Cyprus. Got a lot more that I could address, but again, I want to turn the floor back over to Nick. Hopefully I've been provocative enough that we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your observations. And we're going to definitely have a lot more to say during the Q&A. Now, our last panelist today, before we move on to that Q&A, and obviously when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, many people, if they don't know, they should, that the U.S. Congress has an important role to play within this context. And to sort of give us a little bit of a view from Capitol Hill, it's a pleasure to have with us today Piero Tozzi, which is making his second appearance on one of our virtual speaker forums, and good to see you again. Piero is a Republican staff director for the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And in addition, he serves as a senior foreign policy advisor and counsel to Representative Christopher Smith from New Jersey. Piero, it's always a pleasure to see you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thanks, Nick. This is my second virtual appearance and third overall. So it's really great to be back here with you again. And it's always difficult to clean up when you have two outstanding speakers. So I'll try to maybe touch on some different points. I think when we talk about Joe Biden, and many of us have that, and certainly in the Greek community, the memory of Joe Biden, the senator, who was a great friend to the Greek American community, who understood the situation in Cyprus as they unfolded back in 1974. So he's somebody certainly with a great history there. But I think we really need to look at the issue now. Personnel is policy, and we have to take a look at the Biden administration's personnel and also institutions, in particular the State Department. Where when we do look at that crystal ball. And we also have to, I think, acknowledge the fact that Joe Biden himself is not as energetic as he once was. So you're going to be, I think, looking at, so we should sort of disabuse ourselves or put aside some of the earlier memories we had there. And also, and I think it's been touched upon too, we have to remember that Joe Biden for 8 years was a key member of the Obama administration. And the Obama administration, in many ways, had a number of policy concerns that impact. One, of course, was the attitude towards the Muslim Brotherhood, particularly in Egypt, and that is something that's inexorably linked with Erdogan and the Turkey question. And as I think Michael had alluded to, both Obama and Trump, they had this odd bromance with Erdogan. I think yes, Obama talking about his BFF there. And then I think you have to look more broadly within the Democratic Party, the attitudes towards Islam and Islamism, and sort of this rise of sort of the intersectional ideology. So I take the point, I think it's well made, that we'll see sort of a professionalism and a process there, but there are these other tensions too that I think could have an impact. I think when we look at the question though American policy and particularly with regards to the Eastern Mediterranean, one thing that's very important is to kind of keep in mind, how does Turkey view the world? And I think, and I know Ambassador Miller alluded to it, we have to kind of take a broader perspective, and he focused on the Eastern Mediterranean, in part because that's been covered. I think we need to step back a second and take a look at that broader picture and this notion of strategic depth, which has characterized much of Turkish foreign policy. It's a term that Ahmed Davutoglu had developed, a former foreign minister, and has been very influential. And Turkey views the Eastern Mediterranean, I think, as part of a broader context, and we do need to keep that in mind. Some people have also spoken of this desire for neo-Ottomanism and an effort to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire, but we also have to look at the competition that Turkey has with Saudi Arabia for supremacy in the Sunni Muslim world, and all these things are factors. So the Eastern Mediterranean, I think, fits in within this holistic picture, at least as far as Turkey is concerned, and we need to be aware of that. I think look a little bit at that competition with Saudi Arabia for leadership in the Muslim world. We see a form of Islamism, like I alluded to, the support of the Muslim Brotherhood. We see Erdogan with his four-finger salute often. That, I think, is a concern that we need to take into account. We have to look at certain actions that were taken, for example, this past year with regards to the Hagia Sophia. That speaks, I think, to a larger Sunni Muslim audience. If we look at the State Department response to that of Secretary Pompeo, in many ways was very inadequate because it didn't really address, talks about the importance of this building. Well, it's far more significant than that, and it does have symbolic import. You look at Erdogan's statements regarding the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and again, this is to an audience where they want to have leadership there too. And you have this competition, particularly with Saudi Arabia, Libya. We see it supporting different factions, but also vis-a-vis Yemen, the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa. So it's really, I think, something that all these things impact the Eastern Mediterranean. And then we also see the cultural influence of Turkey in the Sunni Muslim world. Some of you have spoken with, talked about the series available on Netflix, Ertugrul, about the rise of the Ottomans, but that has a tremendous cultural footprint. And you also have this strange relationship with Iran. The enemy of my enemy is my friend vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. And ultimately, there's going to be conflict there. Now, with all that in mind, the question is, does the incoming administration, does our existing State Department, do they view the world when they approach these things through the eyes of Turkey, or do they not? Because if you don't accept certain premises, your conclusions are going to be wrong. But this idea of personnel as policy, let's kind of quickly, in the time that we have, maybe go over some of the key figures. I think the NSC team that Biden's putting together overall is pretty good. Jake Sullivan, Turkey is out of control. That's an article that he did, so I think it's pretty solid. Brett McGurk will be responsible for the Middle East and North Africa. Again, has a very realistic understanding of Turkey. That's not the case, I think, with Amanda Sloat, who's NSC person on Europe, and that's a problem area there. I think, defense and CIA, with William Burns and Lloyd Austin, maybe it's not fair to kind of judge them from where they were 4 years ago, but I think their thinking had been kind of conventional with regards to Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally, the importance of Incirlik Air Base. And let's see if their thinking has evolved. I think that's an open question. State Department, which is something that I've engaged in my work on Capitol Hill. I think Tony Blinken has made some, good statements, certainly in his confirmation hearing, and recently he's opposed to a sort of a two-state solution for Cyprus. He said that Turkey is not acting like an ally. He also looks at their relations with Russia. So I think overall he's going to be pretty good. I suspect, however, that he's going to push these talks that we just saw start again between Greece and Turkey. I'm not too optimistic. I mean, we had 60 talks between 2002 and 2016 between Greece and Turkey, and where has it gotten? And I mean, I guess talk is better than war, but I'm not overly optimistic there. If you look at some of the bureaus within state, EUR, the Europe Bureau, I think tends to be somewhat conventional in thinking. It's sort of your grandfather's Turkey. They push back when we in Congress suggest sanctions, Magnitsky sanctions. The AF Bureau, where I've had a lot of engagement with, they really, when you raise the issue of Turkey, and it's not just the Horn of Africa or Libya, it's also throughout West Africa. It's also the attempts to take over the Gulenist schools throughout Africa and use them as indoctrination centers. They tend to say, well, Turkey's a NATO ally, and at least it's not China. But you have to look at what Turkey's ambitions are there. Nick, we've had this issue with the Cultural Affairs Bureau and that MOU that was
11th hour MOU.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk more about that in the question and answer, but you saw how they kind of slipped that in at the last minute there, and it's again, it's sort of a very conventional way of looking at Turkey. So that's something of concern. Some of the other personalities that are involved, Victoria Nuland and Wendy Sherman, they're critics of Turkey, but more from a Russia angle. And of course, Wendy Sherman was very instrumental in the whole Iran rapprochement. So that's, I think, an area of concern. Uzra Zaya, the Undersecretary for Security Democracy, she cleaned up for Hillary post Benghazi, so she's got a record there. Bonnie Jenkins in arms control, I'm really worried about her. She's, we talked about the intersectionality influence in the Democratic Party. She does have a fairly radical past. And that's someone I think to keep in mind as an important policy person, even though her role is that of a domestic policy advisor. That's Susan Rice, and I can't see her staying in the domestic policy box. And she also is that nexus with the Obama administration too. Rick Grinnell recently made statements, our former ambassador to Germany and director of national intelligence, that he sees Susan Rice as kind of being this eminence grise behind the scenes, and that remains to be seen, but she may be a factor. So I think the big question is, given what I said at the beginning about strategic depth and what's Turkey's position is overall, I think the question is, do these people get that, or do they view things more conventionally? And that's a big question. And then one final point that I'm going to make vis-a-vis the Biden administration, that is a domestic policy issue in part, but that's the energy policy. And I'm not going to, the decisions that were made with the XL pipeline, the no drilling in the Arctic, the rejoining the Paris Accords, I'm not going to focus on the domestic policy implications of that, but that's going to have an impact on energy policy. Maybe as a positive in the medium or long term, you'll see it might be a boon to development of the exploration that we see in the Eastern Mediterranean between Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. But I think more immediately it'll be a boon to Saudi Arabia, which, again, that conflict vis-a-vis Turkey, and then to Russia, and there is this emerging Russia-Turkey nexus that we saw with Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh too. But you also have the Turkish pipeline, the Turk Stream pipeline between Russia and Turkey. So, kind of keeping in mind the time here, I think I'll stop with that. But I just wanted to throw those issues out there, and we'll turn it over to you, Nick, and any questions and answers.
Oh, thank you, Piero, and thank you to all the panelists. Well, this organization, the American Hellenic Institute, takes great pride that for the better part of its entire public service, we've been in contact with President Biden now from the early days in '74, when our team on the ground in Delaware reached out to him regarding the Cyprus issue at the time, and certainly throughout the years as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and so forth. As a matter of fact, I went downstairs and I have files of letters by President Biden to us at the organization, and I will read a quote from one of those letters later on. But and then his team, as Piero said, and you framed all the issues and all the problems, and as Piero talked about his team, all of them are exceptionally keenly aware of the region and certainly of the dynamics that Turkey brings upon the region. But as a president in this town said many years ago, he said, trust but verify. Well, I'll flip it. I'll say verify and then trust. So having said that, let me ask a question here. And Michael Rubin, you wrote recently, and I quote from this article, it was U.S. and Turkey on a course for diplomatic economic collision. You say, Americans may identify China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran as their top foreign challenges. But the test Biden most likely will have to confront early in his term is the growing challenge Turkey poses to international law, security, and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. So on that comment, and from the taken from the view that this area, at least for us, it's important, but how important overall is the area of the Eastern Mediterranean in the top, 5, 6, 3? Is it a tertiary? Is it a secondary? Is it a first level issue for U.S. Foreign policy interests?
I'd say it's a secondary level, realistically. The Russia, the China, the Iran, the possibility of state failure in Mexico, those are all what keep strategic thinkers up at night. That said, Turkey might be operating on a different timeline where the problems emanating from the Eastern Med are going to assert themselves quicker. And the reason for that is Erdogan tends to lash out once in order to distract from his own economic failings. After 18 years in power, he has no one else to blame for those failings. And so ultimately, I think that the problem that there's a likelihood that we're going to see a much greater problem in the Eastern Mediterranean soon. It's also interrelated with some of the other issues simply because the whole reason why Turkey doesn't want Cyprus to be able to produce its own gas and to ship it to Europe is because Turkey makes a killing as a transshipment center. And I was talking to the Iraqi oil minister about 7 years ago. And at the time, he had said that the rental fees for just the Beji to Ceyhan portion of the pipeline, which is fairly small, was about $30 million a month or $360 million a year. When you consider what that would mean for all of Baku to Ceyhan, for example, you see you're talking billions of dollars. If you have customers that are able to bypass that, then that's a direct financial hit to Turkey's economic power, as well as its political leverage, its diplomatic leverage over other states. You add on to the fact that Russia and Iran don't want us to have other alternatives. And this becomes the center of a storm, a perfect storm. That's what I worry about.
But of course, everyone knows who follows the energy issues there, knows that none of these energies will come online for the foreseeable 7 or 8 years down the road. And who knows what prices will be at that time, and what knows what alternative energy issues we'll be looking at that time.
Well, you're absolutely right there, Nick. But when you say Erdogan knows, I always have to put an asterisk around that, simply because Erdogan, I'm not sure how much he does know, because he's surrounded himself in a bubble of sycophancy, where if you don't acknowledge what Erdogan wants you to acknowledge, then at worst you lose your livelihood. At worst you lose your freedom. At best you lose your livelihood. And so we've got a situation in which Erdogan's own opinions are amplified by those surrounding him, and everyone's afraid to say the emperor has no clothes. Now, I started in Washington 21 years ago, and I've seen the same darn PowerPoints about oil pipelines and gas networks and so forth over those 21 years. And with the exception to Baku to Ceyhan, really nothing is new. That said, there is some exploitation in the Eastern Mediterranean. And unlike the North Shore of Alaska, unlike areas which are far deeper in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, and so forth, you have a relative economic ease with which to extract these resources, which is why it's become such a focus. When I lecture for the military, because as you know, I'm dual-hatted with the Naval Postgraduate School, what I oftentimes explain to deploying carrier strike groups and amphibious ready groups is that what we're seeing in the Eastern Med is that it will become, for the next 20, 25 years, what the Persian Gulf was in the last 25 years of the 20th century.
Very good. Let me, during these confirmation hearings, just last week now, for our Secretary of State who assumed this position today, during the confirmation hearing, Senator Menendez from New Jersey said, in referencing the East Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act, which is held as sort of a groundbreaking legislation, he asked the Secretary designate at the time, how would you continue to enhance investment described in the law and further solidify the critical security relationships with Greece and Cyprus? He answered, in part, the U.S.-Greece security relationship is important to our interests in the Eastern Mediterranean and has grown significantly as bilateral ties have improved, beginning in the Obama administration. If confirmed, I will work to continue to deepen ties between the United States and Greece as well as Cyprus. Mr. Ambassador, what should he do?
You know, that's in all due respect to our Secretary of State, that's the same kind of comments that any Secretary of State would have made over the last 50 years in hearings to be nominated. My sense, again, if I was offering advice, Nick, I agree with Michael. I think this is a secondary region in terms of all the other stuff that's on the Biden administration's plate. And remember, foreign policies, and that takes second fiddle to the pandemic. My sense is that this should be, and I think will be, a relatively modest administration. I see us working closely with the Europeans. I don't see us taking necessarily separate American initiatives, particularly in light of all the stuff that we've seen about working closely with the Europeans. Now, there will be cases where we won't see necessarily eye to eye with the Europeans. Refugees is one. And I do applaud Michael for what he said about Erdogan and the Turkish population in Germany. That's another lever that he's got, and a very serious one. But I don't see us, and I wouldn't advise us taking initiatives unless we are asked to do so on naval engagement in the Eastern Med, on an initiative like I was involved in 20 some odd years ago on Cyprus. I don't see it, and I wouldn't necessarily push for it. I had a couple of people ask me during the campaign, should we get back to a special Cyprus coordinator, which was actually legislated by the Congress. And I said, unless the parties asked for it, I wouldn't do it. I don't, frankly, and this is where I slightly disagree with Michael, I don't see us pushing the Greeks and the Turks in their, which is now, I think, their 61st meeting. I do remember when they weren't talking to each other before the earthquake diplomacy of 20 years ago. And there we did have a role, and we were the main catalyst for calming Emia Karduk down. But, they talk to each other now. And so my advice would be available to be of assistance, but don't insert yourself in when you're not asked.
Well, it seems, that they will put some emphasis on multilateralism, as you mentioned, but there's also a degree of differences between European partners, like France and Germany, in terms of how they view these issues. I'm sure you're not saying, you're advocating, that we should completely leave it up to the Europeans regarding issues, because as I think we all discussed here, we do have interest in the region. They may not be, first tier issues, but we do have issues of providing for peace
No,
and
Nick, I would not, I don't mean to imply at all, leave it up to the Europeans. I'm talking about a real dialogue. We do have interest, Noble Energy, which was just bought, I think, it's a U.S. We have a lot of our interests that are not always exactly European interest. And so I would definitely make sure that in any discussion we have with the Europeans, we make sure that our interests, we have a historic relationship with Greece, which I think is kind of unique. And there's a lot there that we don't have time to get into, which is our interest. It's not ours and the European interest. So I don't want to at all imply that we take a backseat to the Europeans. We push our interest, but we push them to the extent that we're in convergence, we push them together. To the extent we're not in convergence, sure, we do our own diplomacy.
Piero, excuse me, I just want to have a follow-up, to Tom and maybe you or any one of you, but begs the question a little bit. Certainly, you're familiar, obviously, with there's a couple of times when tensions rose above the water. The EMEA crisis, where Bill Clinton was able to diffuse tensions, and there's been other times during the course of tensions in the region where a U.S. president could potentially diffuse it. Do you see that today as we are able to do that under this administration and with Mr. Erdogan being in charge? Can we be so secure that we can diffuse tensions from escalating? Any one of you?
Well, Nick, I think one of the things that should keep us all awake at night is the multiple points on the map where you have tension simultaneously. We see China, Taiwan, the Taiwan Strait is a possible tension point. I think the fear that we have is that actors with ill intent take advantage of crises and having multiple crises at a time. And certainly we can see Iran take advantage of that and Turkey. So yeah, we can deal with things sort of serially and address them one at a time. But I think we're headed towards a potential period of instability and ambition, where you have these powers, and we talk about Turkey and also Iran as being seeking regional hegemony, but I think their ambitions are larger than that too. Both of them, and that is something that yes, we could deal with these things in isolation. What do you do when you have multiple outbreaks of crises? So that's I want to throw that out there.
Let me mention, Nick. I can't tell you how many presidents have come into office and said, most famously Bill Clinton, I'm going to be a domestic president. I'm not going to do foreign policy. And foreign policy, JFK came into office. And foreign policy has a way of doing you in if you don't, if you're not aware and on top of things. And usually it presents itself. And as my colleagues were talking to, both of whom know Erdogan, know about Erdogan much better than I do, as they were talking about it, I can imagine how we can be literally in the middle of the night confronted with a crisis that we didn't anticipate. And I think there will be an early test, I can't tell you where, of this administration. It could be in the Eastern Med, it could be elsewhere. And so Joe Biden doesn't have the luxury of focusing on the pandemic. It's gonna confront us in ways that we can't anticipate.
Let me go back to you, Piero, again for a second regarding your perspective from Congress. I've always argued that the momentum regarding the view towards Turkey started with Pastor Brunson. There was a groundswell for that. President Trump actually brought it to his personal attention. It continued then with the S-400, and the S-400 was really the catalyst for the CATSA. Yet, none of the other things that we talked about here today are really discussed in great detail or presented regarding how we should be reacting towards Turkey, the provocations and all the other things we talked about. So what is, in your opinion right now, the overall interest on Capitol Hill in the Eastern Mediterranean? Do you believe, this momentum will continue regarding how they view Turkey? And what should Congress do, to try to strengthen, relations between Greece and Cyprus? What is there practically, in a practical way? I know Greece, for example, right now is looking to upgrade, obviously, a lot of its defense systems. They just signed off on a $2.8 billion deal with France. They're looking to purchase and procure four frigates down the road. There's talk of the F-35 for Greece to purchase that. What other areas from your perspective on Congress can we do to further help and assist our strategic partner Cyprus and our strategic ally Greece?
No, it's certainly a good question and a pertinent one. I mean, I think one of the problems with Congress is that everything is, you're just jumping over hurdles as they arise. There's no really long-term thinking, as to what these, worldview issues are. And, so I think that's one problem. I mean, I think whether it's thinking about Turkey and how does Turkey view the world? We fail to do that, and because we fail to do that, we always sort of focus on the small bowl issues, and we miss the larger picture. That said, I mean, I think we have good bipartisan support towards partnership with Greece and Cyprus. I think you saw Ted Deutsch's bill in the House on the Eastern Mediterranean last Congress, which had very good bipartisan support. And I think as Turkey certainly has lost a lot of its support in Congress because of its conduct over the past several decades. It'll be interesting to see how Greg Meeks, the new chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who traditionally has been more pro-Turkey, how he approaches things. Elliot Engel, who was always, I think, a friend of Greece and certainly a friend of Israel, had a different view. So that's an open question there. But I think overall the trajectory in Congress is one towards realizing that our friends are Greece and Turkey, and as Ambassador Miller said, they provide this stability here in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I think just as we have tried to get Israel the resources it needs to defend itself and to address its strategic needs, I think we're going to see that it's that connection between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, which kudos for Secretary Pompeo for really, I think, realizing that and pushing that in the last administration. I think we're going to see a greater realization there. But there are these other, I guess, forces at work too that mitigate against it, and a lot of that has to do with some of the tensions in the Democratic Party. I don't want to get too partisan here in that response, but I think overall, because of Turkey's human rights record, because of their regional and broader strategic ambitions, I think you're going to see more emphasis placed on both Cyprus and Greece.
Trying to get as many questions as I possibly can here. Michael, Piero talked about obviously the very important relationship that's now institutionalized, frankly, in my opinion, that is between Greece, Israel, and Cyprus. And Secretary Pompeo did elevate to +1, and obviously there's the relationships with Egypt as well. I assume you're of the opinion this relationship needs continues to flourish, and this administration should follow strongly in that path.
I am of that opinion, and I would just add to it that whenever I'm in Baghdad, and whenever I'm able to speak privately with the Iraqi leadership, there is a very there's a cognizance that they also want to move more into this de facto alliance of the moderates. I mean, from the Iraqi perspective, and actually the Jordanian perspective as well, I mean, Turks have often played a role in regional economies, whether it's in the service industry, whether it's in other menial tasks and so forth. throughout the region, people no longer want to have many Turks in these positions simply because of the distrust of Erdogan. And therefore, the Jordanians, alongside the Egyptians and the Iraqis, are very cognizant of trying to say, hey, look, we want jobs, you want human capital. Let's have a symbiotic relationship here. And that's certainly something which you hear from the very top levels of the Iraqi government, the Jordanian government, and the Egyptian government. At the same time, the more that Erdogan challenges previous treaties, including the divisions of exclusive economic zones and so forth, the more he's going to force these countries together, much the same way that it's not the United States diplomacy which has solidified our ties, for example, to Southeast Asia. It's China's arrogance and overreaction in the region and aggression in the region, which causes that, response. And so we're seeing that sort of phenomena in the Eastern Mediterranean right now, where people are simply organizing themselves and finding new allies of convenience and mutual interests simply because they share a mutual fear of Turkey and Turkey's aggression.
Tom, you mentioned earlier in your opening comments regarding the ecumenical patriarchy, which is a very important issue for us and should be for the world, as this man represents 300 million Orthodox Christians around the world, and approximately, I believe it's somewhere around 3 million Orthodox Christians here in the United States. He is, the spiritual leader of 3 million Americans. As such, you can argue that he should be protected under U.S. law. Yeah, we know some of the problems and the plight of the ecumenical patriarchy. We saw something we never believed we would see, and that is turning Hagia Sophia from a museum back to a mosque. And again, another provocative action by. I'm sorry?
My wife was just talking to me. Sorry, go ahead.
Always important to acknowledge your wife. Be it as it may, certainly this president has visited as vice president, and he has spoke about how disturbed he was regarding what happened with the Saint Sophia issue. Again, and on the eve, and Piero mentioned it, of a previous administration, they slipped through an MOU, controversial one that has ramifications that can be very problematic, is cultural property agreement. Can you speak overall as to, again, how important an issue of religious freedom has got to be an important issue? We have the International Religious Freedom Act, which was passed unanimously in 1998 under President Obama. We created the Commission on Religious Freedom and so forth. How much do you think this administration should push for the protection of the patriarchate, and what can he do, if anything, regarding or should do regarding Saint Sophia and this cultural memorandum?
Well, this is a perfect example, Nick, of what we were talking about earlier, where the United States might have a very strong view on an issue and the Europeans maybe less so. And so this is a good example where this is an issue that we should take up regardless of what our allies' sense of the importance of the issue is. It is extremely important. Biden gets this. I mean, Biden's gotten this for decades. I would also say, and this is not a knock on my former profession, but you can do more than one thing at once, and one thing working. Hagia Sophia is an issue that should be right out there, and we should not be nuanced or anything else about this thing. There's I hate to say a right and a wrong, and what the Turks did was tactically wrong and strategically wrong and morally wrong, and so this is something that I would hope that the president, that Blinken, that others would really push hard, because it is important to not just the Orthodox. It's important is an issue of religious freedom. And as long as it's out there, and as long as Erdogan gets a pass, which he essentially did. I mean, we came out with a statement and all that kind of stuff. He'll continue to do this kind of stuff, and that burnishes his image as a protector of the Islamic faith, and that's what this is all about. But let's remember a little bit of history, and let's remember a little bit of the sensitivities of others. There are other religions in the world as well. Sorry to go off on this one, but I feel very, very strongly about it, and that's why I led with this. It's not an Eastern Med issue per se. It's extremely important, and this is one that I would urge the U.S. not to try to get that nuanced common position with the Europeans, just to push.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and certainly provocation should have consequences. And to your point, we've always argued that you can't appease somebody like Mr. Erdogan because that just continues to embolden them. And certainly when it comes to something as fundamental as religious freedom. Michael, did you want to add something? I can see you trying to say something.
No, I was actually answering Aleko's question on the question and answer function.
Okay, somebody else, I see. Okay. Well, look, I'll try to get to some of this real quick. We answered the first one there. But I just have, look, let's go with Aleko then. Aleko Harlambi is one of our board members. I'll just read it verbatim here. Well, it just disappeared.
Oh, sorry about that. I just sent my answer.
Okay, sorry. So I can't. I can't.
Well, actually, I can read it if you'd let me.
Go ahead.
From the answered questions function, do any of you believe the Biden administration would have handled things differently with regard to Turkey's military presence in Syria, Turkey's military presence in Libya, and Turkey's military presence in Nagorno-Karabakh? If so, how do you think Biden would handle things differently? Would a Biden administration have taken a stronger stand? Is the U.S. best interest to take a stronger stand? And the core of my answer to that was, with regard to Syria, with regard to Libya, I think it's going to be more of the same. Against this is a bipartisan issue, and both Republicans and Democrats are concerned by what Turkey has been doing in Libya, what Turkey has been doing in Syria. What I do think the test for the Biden administration and for Tony Blinken will be is whether whether Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act is waived. As you know, the waiver of Section 907 allows military assistance and other assistance to Azerbaijan. However, in order to justify that waiver, we have to certify that Azerbaijan is committed to solve the Nagorno-Karabakh issue peacefully. It's not going to indulge in unilateral military action, and it's only going to embrace diplomacy. Back shortly before, I think it was actually on March 26th, Stephen Begun, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, issued a waiver. And then, of course, later, we saw the situation where Azerbaijan launched a surprise attack on Nagorno-Karabakh. And what most people in America don't realize, I was in Nagorno-Karabakh shortly after this, is it occurred on the 100th anniversary of the Turkish invasion of Armenia, of the independent Republic of Armenia. And so it was seen in the region in terms of support for the greater genocide or the continuation of genocide. At any rate, we now see that Azerbaijan has completely violated the terms of that waiver. We have to have a separate conversation in the United States about whether we saw this coming or whether it was an intelligence failure. Regardless, if we once again give Azerbaijan a waiver and waive Section 907, what this basically means is we're letting Azerbaijan and Turkey behind them get away with murder in the sake of diplomatic convenience in order to spur further discussions. I would argue that if we do that, some people in the State Department might suggest this is the best way to get everyone back to the table. Let's not provoke Azerbaijan to walk away from the Minsk process. I would suggest that that logic would be a mistake, because if Azerbaijan concludes and if Turkey concludes that they can violate US law and that Congress is willing to ignore that, then it's simply going to lead to more aggression, either in Nagorno-Karabakh or elsewhere.
Okay, look, we are at 3:10, and I promise we're going to try to get done by 3:15. We have to. One quick question from London, and then I'm going to finish off with one final question on Cyprus. It's a series of questions. I'll just ask one of the three this person asks. This should be a quick response, hopefully. What can the Biden administration do to help revitalize the tourism sector through foreign policy actions? Is there anybody want to tackle that one? Obviously, it's very important for both Greece and Cyprus in view of this pandemic, but is there anything on the foreign policy side that can be done?
You're saying on tourism?
Yeah.
You know, this is kind of a misnomer, Nick. For years, it's the administration should do this or that. This is basically private sector. I mean, we can, you know, an administration, they can talk, they can say, you know, blah, 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 talk about, but, you know, the pandemic kind of rules at this point, and people are going to visit Greece and Cyprus based more on health considerations than anything else. And so what the kinds of things that an administration can do to promote Cyprus, you can sign agreements and, you know, have the two governments. And I've been part of this, but it's largely not with a lot, you know, it doesn't have a lot of substance to it. It's private sector, and people will get on planes and visit Greece and Cyprus when they feel comfortable.
If I may just take a slightly different angle on that, instead of just looking at Greece and Cyprus, and I agree with Ambassador Miller, I do want to point out that Turkish Air and the huge Turkish government investment, they own 49%. The private sector technically owns 51%, but a lot of those are Erdogan cronies. Erdogan is over leveraged with the multi-billion-dollar investment in this new Istanbul airport. That's ripe for sanctions in order to coerce Turkey. And it's one of those things, sanctions that probably Europe could get behind, simply because Turkey can't respond to any sanctioning against Turkish Air by saying, we're not going to let European airliners into Turkey, because that would sabotage Turkey's own tourism industry. And so I do think that this is a lever in order to use tourism and the revenue which Turkey gets from tourism in order to encourage better behavior rather than rogue behavior.
Very good. And this now will be the last question. It's going to take me just a few minutes to sort of frame in terms of what I want to say, because I'm going to be quoting President Biden. But let me just say that of all the issues, maybe still one of the most important issue, in my humble opinion, is Cyprus, because it is an ongoing issue. It's an issue that does not seem to want to be resolve itself because of the nature of the dynamics, and specifically the way Turkey acts upon the region. There's an occupation army there. There's illegal settlers there. There's violations of Cyprus' economic zone. And I would just slightly differ with you, my good friend Tom, in that it wasn't, you know, the Annan plan. When you look at the core elements, and we're not going into it in detail, it's difficult for anybody to accept a permanent occupation army. And for the most part, the Greeks themselves, Greek Cypriots themselves, would have to pay for the entire amount of the bill to try to solve, to bring that plan into fruition, amongst other things. But let me just say what the Biden-Harris campaign, when they issued a statement on positions to the Greek American community, he says, Joe has long opposed the Turkish occupation of northern Cyprus and supported a comprehensive settlement to reunify the island as a bizonal bicommunal federation with political equality. Down further, what it says Joe will do. Joe will work diplomatically to bring a resolution to the Cyprus question. Now, let me read to you a letter by Senator Joe Biden in 1989 to the American Hellenic Institute. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole thing. He says here in part, this is a critical time for the people of Cyprus. Well, when hasn't it been a critical time for the people of Cyprus? And certainly I can't think of any more time critical in view of what has happened in the last year, and including what happened now with Erdogan talking about two-state solutions, and also, you know, the illegal opening of Arosha. And then he goes on to say the following. We in the United States must maintain our steadfast commitment to the cause of unity and freedom for Cyprus. He then goes on to say this as well. This is on the eve of George W.H. Bush presidency. We urge, when he says, what can we do? What do we need to do? First, he says, we must urge the new administration to make Cyprus a higher priority in American foreign policy. Well, now he's president, and now it's his administration. Will he make it a higher priority? He goes on to say, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the rights of Greek Cypriots have been trampled upon, and we must ensure that their claims to ancestral land and property seized during the 1974 invasion are not compromised. Finally, we must send a signal to Turkey that until it has removed every last soldier from Cyprus, it will never be recognized as a full member of the international community. Has anything really changed since 1989 that the president's words, Senator then, President now, should be different, and should he heed his own advice?
Yes and no. I mean, it's 46 years. 1989 was 15 years. And there's a lot of water over the dam. And, there have been big efforts by the U.S. in the past, and I was part of one of those big efforts to really insert the U.S. very much as the key interlocutor between the two sides. What Biden said in that letter, as you were reading it, I very much agree with. We're talking about, the same language. We're talking about bizonal, bicommunal, federal solution, one country. We're talking about wanting to get all foreign troops out of the country. That's very, very abnormal, strange, what have you. What I would suggest if Biden asked me is, I learned something from that 2004 referendum. There is no question that if that referendum had been held in 99, Nick, in my mind, that the Greek Cypriot side would have voted for it. Absolutely no question. There was no question in my mind that President Clarides would have supported it. And 5 years later, there was a different president, and he didn't support it. And the thing that I took out of that referendum, and talking to a lot of friends on the Greek Cypriot side, was about a third, and I'm making these numbers up, very much strongly supported the referendum. About a third probably very much were against the referendum, and about a third were freaked out. They didn't want to buy into the uncertainty that an island or that a country with Turkish Cypriot, they just didn't want to buy into Turkish Cypriot uncertainty that a president at the time, Papadopoulos, kind of stimulated. And that was the third that basically said no. So there were a lot of people on the Greek Cypriot side in 2004 who I was talking to who supported that referendum. And so this is not impossible. This is not, the most difficult problem in the world, and it could be solved. But it's got to be solved in the context of making sure that you reassure people who've grown up, on a divided island, that their life is going to be better, not worse.
Anybody else wants to comment? Well, the only thing I would say to that is, unfortunately, this is still an illegal invasion, an illegal occupation, in violation of any one of all international charters of NATO and so forth and so on. And we need to be able to uphold international law as the United States and not award aggression. I agree, Tom, that frankly, a decision has to be for the Cypriot people. No one is disagreeing with that. And I'm not one here to tell the Cypriot people what they feel is in their own interest. We, I believe, should also have a responsibility to create the climate regarding to provide for this issue. And I stand by my words that I think we've appeased Turkey over the years regarding this issue. Otherwise, there would be no reason why we still have 43,000 illegal troops there, and we allow them, to operate in Cyprus's EEZ. Cyprus cannot defend itself. It's an existential threat, to Cyprus. And you can argue Greece is also Turkey's an existential threat. And I think this administration, if Mr. Biden says it should be at a presidential level and not just only, to the bureaucracy at the State Department, I think that is ultimately what it's going to take to ultimately move the needle and try to resolve this issue to the benefit of all the people, so Cyprus becomes whole, free, and at peace, and in so doing can really properly promote the national and best interest of the United States. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you for participating today. I think we certainly gone over our allotted time. It's been an exceptional discussion. I wish you all a great year, and hopefully we'll call on you again in the future. But we certainly thank you for today. Let me also thank my staff here at the American Hellenic Institute, Elias Yerasulis, who does our congressional outreach, and Emily Pandis, who acts as a producer for our virtual speaker forums. And of course, as always, our sponsor, James Lagos. And if anyone wants to be a sponsor, please reach out to us. We can always use more support to continue to do the work of the American Hellenic Institute. So once again, on behalf of our great panels here today, all of you out there, wish you a good afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you next time when we present another HI Virtual Speakers Forum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.